Most people grow up believing that love automatically guarantees loyalty. That if someone says, "I love you," it means they'll never hurt you, never betray your trust, and never walk away. But real-life relationships are far more complex than that. Love is an emotion. Loyalty is a decision. You can deeply care for someone, even feel connected to them emotionally, but still act in ways that damage the relationship. This is especially true when personal needs go unmet for long periods of time. Emotional gaps don't always erase love. They can simply make it harder to remain aligned with that love in day-to-day behavior. In the case of romantic relationships, many men assume that if their partner says, "I love you," it means everything is secure. They stop checking in emotionally. They stop paying attention to the subtle signs of distance, and they believe their effort is no longer needed. But love that isn't supported by emotional connection, trust, and presence begins to weaken over time. A woman may still love her partner. She might care deeply about his well-being, his future, his health, but if she feels emotionally disconnected, invisible, or misunderstood, that love can exist alongside behaviors that seem contradictory, even harmful. This doesn't mean she's dishonest. It means she's human. There are many reasons a person may act against the interests of the relationship while still holding on to love. Sometimes it's unresolved emotional pain. Sometimes it's a need for connection that has been overlooked. And sometimes it's the belief that love should be enough on its own, when in reality, it needs to be nurtured through presence, care, communication, and attention. So, it's important not to confuse emotional affection with emotional alignment. If someone loves you but doesn't feel heard, seen, or supported, their actions may not always reflect the love they claim to feel. That's not always a betrayal. Sometimes it's a signal, a message that something important has been neglected for too long. The truth is, love is powerful, but it's not enough without emotional investment. A healthy relationship needs both love and loyalty, emotion and action, feeling and follow-through, understanding. This distinction can save you from future heartbreak, and it can also help you build deeper, more lasting connections with those you care about. When most people think about a relationship ending or falling apart, they imagine arguments, betrayal, or visible problems. But the reality is often much quieter. Emotional disconnection doesn't announce itself. It happens slowly, over time. While everything on the surface might still look fine, you're in the same room, but not really together. You speak, but nothing important is being said. You share meals, plans, and responsibilities, but the emotional bond that once tied you together starts to fade. This is the kind of distance that creeps in silently. You may not notice the moment it begins. She may still smile. She may still say, "I love you," but inside, something starts to shift. Not necessarily because of something big you did wrong, but often because of small things left unspoken over days, weeks, months. What many men don't realize is that emotional presence matters as much as physical presence. You may be providing, protecting, or doing your best under stress, but if she doesn't feel emotionally connected to you, if she feels invisible, unheard, or emotionally alone, that connection begins to weaken. And this isn't about blame, it's about awareness. When emotional connection is missing, people often seek it in other ways, not because they want to hurt their partner, but because they want to feel human again. They want to be listened to without judgment, to be asked how they really feel, to be reminded that they matter beyond their roles and responsibilities. This is how emotional affairs begin, not always through intent, but through longing. A single, deep conversation, a moment of feeling understood, a quiet sense of being seen. These things can become powerful when someone has been emotionally starved for too long. That's why emotional disconnection is dangerous. It doesn't look like a warning sign, but it is. When a woman stops talking, stops reaching out, stops sharing what she's feeling, it's not always because she's fine. Sometimes it's because she's already drifting. The question is not just are we together, but are we still connected? Because once that emotional thread snaps, rebuilding trust and closeness becomes much harder, and sometimes too late. The signs that a relationship is drifting apart are rarely loud. They don't always come in the form of arguments, accusations, or dramatic exits. More often, they arrive quietly in silence, in subtle changes, in moments that feel off but are easy to overlook. That if something is wrong, they'll be told directly. But emotional distance doesn't always come with clear warnings. It often shows up through energy shifts, like when she stops initiating conversations, or when the warmth in her voice becomes more routine than real, or when she smiles out of habit, but the emotion behind it is missing. These signs are easy to miss because nothing is technically wrong. Life goes on. You both do what needs to be done. You handle responsibilities, talk about logistics, maybe even laugh together now and then, but the emotional connection has changed, and if you're not paying attention, you won't see it until the gap is wide enough to cause damage. She may stop asking you to talk, not because she doesn't want to, but because she's tired of trying. She may stop mentioning what bothers her, not because everything's okay, but because she's learned it doesn't lead anywhere. She may stop reaching for your hand, not out of rejection, but out of quiet resignation. These are the silent signs, the ones that don't yell. They withdraw, and when they go unnoticed, they often grow into distance that becomes hard to bridge. The mistake many people make is assuming that no news means good news. But in relationships, emotional silence is rarely neutral. It usually means something important has been left unspoken, something that needs attention. When someone feels seen, heard, and emotionally safe, they speak freely, they stay engaged. But when they start to feel invisible or disconnected, they pull back, not always intentionally, but naturally. So the real question is this: are you only responding to problems when they're loud, or are you paying attention when they're still quiet? Because the earlier you notice the silence, the easier it is to reconnect, and the earlier you act on emotional distance, the more likely you are to protect something worth keeping. The idea of revenge often brings to mind anger, outbursts, or dramatic actions. But in real relationships, it doesn't always look that way. Sometimes, emotional revenge is quiet, subtle, unspoken, and it doesn't come from hate, it comes from hurt. A woman doesn't need to stop loving you to carry emotional pain. In fact, many women continue to love, care, and show up for their partner, while silently holding on to past disappointments that were never addressed. Maybe she shared something personal and it was dismissed. Maybe she needed your support in a vulnerable moment and you weren't fully present. Maybe a small joke, a harsh word, or ongoing emotional neglect left an impression you didn't notice, but you couldn't forget. Over time, these unhealed moments accumulate, not as anger that explodes, but as pain that lingers. And when that pain isn't acknowledged or validated, it doesn't simply vanish. It stores in the heart. It reshapes how a person feels in the relationship. And sometimes, that pain eventually expresses itself, not through conversation or conflict, but through emotional detachment, or in more damaging cases, through connection with someone outside the relationship. This is what we mean by emotional revenge. It's not an intentional plan to hurt. It's often a response to feeling hurt, repeatedly, without resolution. It might look like her pulling away, or confiding in someone else, or responding to another person's interest, not because she was looking for it, but because it reminded her what it felt like to be truly seen, even for a moment. That connection, however brief, can feel like emotional justice, not out of spite, but as a way to say, this pain mattered, I mattered. Of course, this doesn't justify breaking trust, but understanding where these actions come from helps prevent them. The real lesson here is simple. Emotional wounds don't disappear just because time passes. They need care, presence, and validation. So ask yourself honestly, have there been times when she needed you emotionally and you didn't show up? If so, it's not too late to rebuild. But it starts by recognizing the small wounds and responding with understanding instead of defense. In relationships, it's easy to assume that doing the right things, being faithful, coming home, paying the bills, showing up, is enough. And to be fair, those things do matter. They create structure, safety, and responsibility. But here's the part many people miss. Presence is not the same as connection, and love is not the same as emotional nourishment. You can love someone deeply and still leave them feeling empty. You can be in the same room and still feel worlds apart. Emotional starvation doesn't happen overnight. It builds slowly. A woman may not even realize it at first. Life is busy, responsibilities are shared, and routines become normal. But something inside her gradually starts to feel unseen, like her deeper emotions, her thoughts, her longings, are no longer part of the relationship. She might not complain. She might even convince herself it's just a phase. But over time, the small things begin to weigh heavier. Being talked to, but not talked with. Being asked what's for dinner, but not how her heart is. Being needed for her role, but not valued for her presence. And then, one day, someone else notices her. Not in a dramatic or inappropriate way, but in a human way. They ask how she's feeling. They notice her energy shift. They listen without distraction. And in that moment, she feels something she's been missing. Connection. That's not about desire. That's about being emotionally fed. About feeling alive, valued, present. Emotional starvation doesn't scream. It whispers, and if it goes on for too long, those whispers can turn into distance, disinterest, or misplaced connection, not because she's looking to leave, but because she's trying to feel alive again. That's why emotional attention is essential. Not just saying I love you, but showing that you see her, hear her, and still choose her beyond routine, beyond habit. So, ask yourself honestly, are you feeding her heart, or just going through the motions? Because people don't always leave for someone better. Sometimes they leave to feel again, to reconnect with a part of themselves that felt forgotten. Every human being needs connection, not just romantic connection, but emotional recognition. The feeling of being seen, heard, and valued. This kind of connection acts like emotional oxygen. Without it, we don't necessarily fall apart right away, but slowly, quietly, we begin to feel empty. For many women, this lack of emotional oxygen doesn't come from arguments or distance. It comes from routine, from feeling like the relationship is running on autopilot. The conversations become practical, the gestures become habitual, and the emotional presence begins to fade without anyone noticing. What happens then? She starts to feel invisible, not in a dramatic way, but in small, subtle moments. When her mood changes and no one asks why, when she wears something different and no one notices, when she speaks from the heart and gets a distracted response, that's when emotional oxygen runs low. And then, sometimes, a stranger or acquaintance provides what feels like a breath of fresh air. Maybe someone compliments her. Maybe someone listens, really listens without rushing the conversation. Maybe someone notices a detail her partner stopped seeing. It's not always romantic, often it's just human, and it reminds her of how connection used to feel. This isn't about blame, it's about understanding that emotional needs don't go away just because someone is in a relationship. Just like physical presence doesn't guarantee closeness, emotional absence can exist even in a home filled with people. And if someone has been emotionally holding their breath for too long, even a small gesture can feel like relief. So what can you do? Stay emotionally awake. Look for the unspoken signals. Pay attention to her energy, her tone, her eyes. Ask how she's doing, not just out of habit, but with sincerity. Emotional oxygen isn't about doing grand things. It's about small, consistent reminders that she still matters to you on a deep level. That you see her not just as a partner, but as a person. When emotional oxygen is present, trust grows, connection deepens, and detachment becomes less likely. Because when someone can breathe freely with you, they won't need to seek air elsewhere. In many relationships, especially long-term ones, people begin to suppress parts of themselves to maintain peace, stability, or routine. This happens quietly and often without intent. Over time, a woman may start to set aside her desires, needs, and individuality. Not because she wants to, but because she feels like she has to. She plays roles: caretaker, mother, partner, planner, supporter, and in doing so, the vibrant, expressive part of her, the one with dreams, depth, curiosity, and emotional intensity, begins to quiet down, not disappear, just pause. Because she's told that being a good woman means holding things together, being calm, being steady, being selfless. But here's the truth. What's repressed doesn't vanish, it simply waits. Underneath the surface, she still longs to feel free, to express without judgment, to explore her thoughts without being corrected, to feel seen not just as responsible or supportive, but as complex, creative, passionate, fully human. And when that part of her remains buried for too long, it doesn't just go away. It begins to feel distant from the relationship. She may still love deeply, but she no longer feels fully alive in the connection. That's when cracks start to form. Now, this isn't about replacing anyone, it's about rediscovering herself. Sometimes, all it takes is one unexpected conversation, one moment of being seen, heard, or understood by someone outside the relationship, to remind her of the parts she's hidden. It's not necessarily about the other person, it's about the version of herself that comes alive in that moment. That awakening can be powerful, not because she's trying to escape you, but because she's trying to reconnect with herself. It's important to understand that emotional fulfillment isn't just about safety, it's also about space. The space to grow, to express, to evolve within the relationship, not outside of it. So ask yourself, has she had to bury parts of who she is just to be with you? And if so, how can you create a space where she doesn't have to choose between the relationship and her full self? When a woman feels free to be all of who she is, she doesn't look elsewhere, because she already feels whole where she is. There comes a moment in some women's lives where they begin to feel as though they've lost themselves, not because someone stole their identity, but because slowly, piece by piece, they gave it away, to responsibility, to the relationship, to family, to expectations, to survival. She may look in the mirror and still see the same face, but inside, she feels like a stranger to herself, disconnected from the passion, purpose, and personality that once defined her. And this disconnection doesn't always mean the relationship is unhealthy. Sometimes, it simply means she's grown in a direction that no longer feels aligned with who she used to be. This is where the resurrection of the self begins. It's not about rebellion, it's not about betrayal, it's about reawakening, an inner urge to reclaim what she gave up, even if she did so willingly. She may begin exploring new interests, she may seek deeper conversations, pursue meaningful goals, or surround herself with people who reflect a different version of her, a version she misses. This resurrection doesn't always begin with conflict. It often starts quietly, with questions like, who am I outside this relationship? When did I stop choosing what lights me up? Am I growing, or am I just surviving? In some cases, this inner search leads her away from the relationship emotionally, even if she hasn't physically stepped out of it. If the partnership doesn't offer the room to grow or evolve, she may start to feel confined, like her own life is on pause while she's living someone else's story. And in rare cases, when someone else enters her life, who mirrors the woman she used to be or wants to become, it can feel like a spark of life. It's less about romance and more about identity, the chance to be seen in a way that feels new but also deeply familiar. This doesn't excuse disloyalty, but it helps explain the emotional mechanics behind it. It's not always about escaping the partner, it's often about escaping the version of herself she no longer recognizes. The key is this: if you want to keep love alive, you must allow space for her to evolve, not just into what you need, but into who she's becoming. Many men believe that if they provide emotional safety, being kind, present, loyal, and respectful, that this alone should be enough to sustain a strong connection. And while emotional safety is essential in any healthy relationship, it's only one half of the equation. The other half is emotional fulfillment, a feeling that goes beyond security. It's about inspiration, growth, tension, and emotional aliveness, and it's here that many relationships unknowingly start to drift. You can be a good man doing everything right, and still leave her feeling emotionally undernourished, not because you're not enough, but because the connection has become predictable, familiar, and perhaps overly comfortable. Emotional safety makes her feel protected, but emotional fulfillment makes her feel alive. This doesn't mean a woman needs constant drama or emotional highs. What it does mean is that, over time, if the relationship becomes flat, if the emotional landscape is always neutral, always agreeable, and never challenged, she may begin to feel something missing, a sense of emotional weightlessness, a longing for a deeper emotional spark. Fulfillment can come from intellectual stimulation, shared purpose, playful tension, meaningful conversations, or mutual challenge. It often thrives when both partners are still growing, not just together, but individually. Without it, the relationship can begin to feel more like a friendship or a routine partnership than a romantic connection. And in that quiet gap, someone else, even unintentionally, may offer what feels like emotional depth, curiosity, or a reminder of that inner fire she once felt. It's not always about seeking someone better. It's often about seeking something more. Men who understand this difference begin to nurture not just safety, but also emotional adventure, encouraging growth, embracing curiosity, staying unpredictable in healthy ways, and creating space for both stability and excitement, because in the end, it's not just about being safe, it's about being felt. One of the most painful realizations a woman can have in a relationship is this: he's not going to change, and it doesn't have to be about something big. Sometimes, it's the small, consistent patterns that wear her down. Maybe she's brought up her concerns about communication, emotional distance, or lack of effort, not once, but multiple times, and every time, there might be a promise, a moment of improvement, or silence. But eventually, everything goes back to how it was. Over time, this repetition builds a quiet kind of fatigue. She begins to feel unheard, not just ignored, but emotionally dismissed. That's when something deeper begins to shift inside her. She starts to lose hope, not because she stopped loving you, but because she stopped believing that things could be different. It's a slow erosion of trust, not in you as a person, but in your willingness to grow with her. And when a woman reaches that point, she doesn't always express it outwardly. She might still be there physically, still fulfilling her roles, still showing up day to day, but inside, she's drifting. She may have imagined a future with you, but now, that future starts to feel like a story she's telling herself, just to cope. She wanted a partner who grows with her, not someone who stays still while she evolves emotionally, mentally, and spiritually. In this space of emotional disconnect, if someone enters her world who seems willing to listen, reflect, grow, it can shake her, not necessarily because that new person is better, but because they represent the possibility of change, something she no longer associates with you. That's when confusion turns into emotional distance, and eventually, into disconnection. It's not always betrayal of love. Sometimes, it's the absence of hope that ends a relationship. Growth is not about perfection. It's about effort, about showing her that you hear her, not just to end the argument, but to understand her pain and do something about it. Because once she believes you'll never change, she starts to imagine a life without you, even if she still loves you. And that, more than anything, is what breaks the bond.